there we go. We'll get the recording going. So tonight's meeting for SBPMA, we've got a fantastic speaker. We're lucky to have John Sadler. Sadler or Sadler? Correct me on that one.
Sadler.
Sadler. Okay. All right. So we're looking forward to hearing his stories. He's been in the business for a very long time, and has a lot of wisdom to share that isn't necessarily written down in books. Want to just do a quick reminder for folks. We are on kind of our new format schedule as an experiment. So we are saving the news, product management events, networking, and some of that for after the Q&A. And so if you want to stick around for that, there's a chance to kind of interact with some of the other attendees. And we found that to be useful, as well as learning what other events are going on in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley at large that may be of interest. So hang around for that. Don't bail when the questions start. And with that, we will get started here. So with that, I would like to introduce John Sadler. Did I get it right, or did I goof it up again?
Well, it's okay. My name is pronounced many, many different ways. I go with Sadler, but you do
Sadler.
whatever you need
Okay.
to do. It's okay.
All right. We'll start over. I'd like to introduce this evening our speaker, John Sadler. He is going to be presenting on 5 essential habits for accelerating your product development. And we're happy to have him here this evening at SVPMA. John is a principal at TC Gen, and he's former vice president and general manager at Agilent Technologies, definitely one of the founding companies of Silicon Valley. And John, if you'd like to start your slides, I can introduce you while you're getting set up here.
Thanks very much. I really
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity to be here.
John focuses on helping executive leaders create the conditions for their teams to deliver value, get to market much more rapidly, especially where software is involved. Most recently, he's been vice president, general manager of the enterprise software division of Agilent Technologies. In that role, he sponsored and led a delivery turnaround, resulting in an annual revenue growth over 2x against the market. And he's had consistent on-time release cadences with outstanding field quality, a thriving acquisition growing at 35%, and a clear and customer-validated digital lab strategy embraced across the company. Critical to his success was the development and effective use of scaled agile practices across multiple sites globally, including outsourcing partners, along with a strong culture of continuous improvement. John earned his MS in mechanical engineering at Stanford University and a BS in mechanical engineering at MIT. He's an inventor with over 20 patent families and is the author of, is it Fici?
Fickle.
Fickle. Fickle. I couldn't read the font was tripping me up. Of Fickle, a widely adopted open source software package for embedded system scripting. And with that, welcome, John, and take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. And thanks in general to SVPMA for inviting me to speak tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to hearing from those who are here and interested in asking questions, because I think I hope you'll have a lot of them. So I'd like to start by telling you a story before I tell you what the habits are. And I'm going to do a couple of things that you're probably not supposed to do in telling a story. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get to the scary parts first, after I tell you that there is pretty much a happy ending to this. So let's start with the scary parts. Here are the scary parts. And I'm curious, I don't know whether you can raise hands on Zoom or not, but how many of you have seen one or more of these this particular syndrome, not knowing when things are going to get delivered, having field problems that won't go away, credibility challenges from customers in the field because they don't believe that you're going to do what you said you were going to do. Everything being the top priority because everything is so backlogged in the product delivery queue that, again, is in. I see at least one hand. Thank you. And people, therefore, because of all the pressure, staying in their silos and trying to check off their personal box without taking a whole lot of concern what rolls downhill. Bad news happening really late, handoff stress, which is kind of a corollary of all of the above. And then if that wasn't enough, maybe you've got a 20 or 25-year-old very, very successful product that happens to be aging, and you're having to transition that from on-prem to the cloud, or even just modernize it because the market has moved and you haven't. A huge installed base that expects you to maintain backward compatibility, and multiple internal stakeholders that have their own independent priorities. If you've had one or more of these, I can tell you we had all of them. So I had no idea what I was getting into when I walked into Agilent Software and Informatics Division about 10 years ago. I knew that I really liked the idea that this hardware company, a venerable manufacturer of really, really trusted scientific instruments and diagnostic and pathology tools, had built an enterprise software division as a profit center. So many companies of this type saw software as just being a cost. And the CEO and other executives at Agilent had recognized that software was going to be, it was the face that was the thing that customers use when they work with your products, and decided to make that into something that was self-sustaining. But at the same time, we had some serious problems. So when I walked in, we had all of the things in the horror movie before, including really, really serious difficulty executing, rolling schedule slips, a mandate to deliver a new modernized product that we were having a hard time getting out the door, and a kind of a top-down culture that where everybody was trying to execute a plan, and we're having a really, really hard time as a result of that staying in contact with customers. And because of that, they were sort of on the no-fly list with the sales team, with the field service team, and to some degree with customers themselves because of these zombie field issues that had been out. Some customers had really irritating to disabling problems that were more than 3 years old, and that made it really hard to have a conversation about the future. So I think we realized pretty quickly, my leadership team and I, that we had to do something about our execution problem and rebuild our credibility before we could start talking about having a vision or having a strategy. So just a couple of quick things about me. I was the VPGM of the software division at Agilent for about 7 years, starting in late 2014. I'm an engineer by background, as you already heard, and I've worked a great deal on products that have mixed software and hardware. So it's usually hardware devices that are controlled by software in one way or another. There have been a couple of occasions where I've worked on pure software, internet properties, digital health, and that sort of thing, but it's been mostly software controlled hardware. And I've done it in companies from garage size to Fortune 100 and a range of markets and technologies, but almost always in cases where the products that we're making are being used in an environment where it really matters that it's reliable and it matters that it gives the right answer. Often B2B. So I don't have experience at Facebook or someplace like that, and you'll see that some of what I have to say is colored by, it's obviously going to be colored by my experience. Your mileage may vary, but I think that there's some general lessons in here that can be taken away. All of the things that I'm going to talk about today are things that I've learned the hard way along with my team. They're not methodologies, they're hard-fought experience, and I hope that they'll be helpful for you. So continuing the Agilent story, one of the first things that I did when I got there after I had a chance to size up the situation was to put this poster up on the wall that you see on the right of the slide here. Predictability, teamwork, evidence, simplify, and customer focus. And predictability is at the top of the list because it was really clear that we had to remedy our execution challenges. And part of the key to that was, how do we make sure that we've set up our operating habits in such a way that we can make promises that we intend to keep and then actually keep them? How do we make that happen? And we thought really hard about how to do that. And we decided that we needed to change a number of things about the way that we operated as a company. We undertook to do a large-scale agile transformation, but that wasn't sufficient by itself. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we did here, but this idea of focusing on predictability, teamwork, and evidence-driven culture, simplifying as much as possible, and really being connected with our customers was sort of the key. And the habits that I'm going to talk about from here derive directly from this focus. And just to jump to the answer for a second, we did get some really good results out of this transition. We launched a new product that had been on rolling slips. We had to take one more slip of about 6 months. And then once we did the launch, we went on to a regular cadence of transitions from which we did not vary, even when we were cyber attacked. And we were able to deliver 65% compound annual growth over the first 5 years, which I think was probably a record for the company in terms of a new product introduction. We also managed over time to be able to approximately double our R&D productivity, meaning that the capacity that we were able to deliver to market, as opposed to the capacity that we spent fixing the bugs that we created and delivered into the field, dealing with attrition, sustaining problems on existing products and that sort of thing. We were able to reduce those things enough that we doubled the amount of, essentially the amount of capacity that we gave to our product management team to be able to make discretionary choices about what kind of value we want to deliver to our customers. And that by itself was a huge deal, but the fact that we were able to greatly improve our field quality and hit reliably on a release cadence gave us a really big credibility advantage with our customers. It got to the point after a few releases on time that we found that our customers, when we told them that something was pretty reliably in the next release, it was almost as good as having it from the perspective of their planning to buy it. And that was a huge advantage for us. These changes were not easy at all. I'll talk a little bit about that, but they were extremely worthwhile. Here's an example of some of the benefits that we reaped. The blue bar at the bottom is what we call the payload. That was the amount of capacity that we told product management we had available for them to fill with backlog, things that they wanted to deliver to market. And the rest were things like time spent fixing defects, time spent sustaining legacy products, time spent because we didn't estimate properly, which is inevitable, and time spent on attrition. And in our case, we had a large outsourced partner in India. And in India at that time, it was not unusual to see 20% turnover on an annual basis. And that turnover was something that we, working with our partner very closely, learned how to manage and drive down, although it was a little uneven. So some combination of reducing all of those things, but particularly with a focus on quality and field quality and test automation, gave us most of the yield that we saw here. So why does this matter for a product manager? That's probably one question you might be asking yourself. Maybe it's obvious, but effective product management needs an execution engine that you can count on and reliable sources of evidence to guide your decisions. There's no point, as we learned, in having a vision or a strategy if you can't deliver them to market. So having the rest of the organization interacting with the product management team in a way that's conducive to delivering a series of timely releases at high quality that have good fidelity to what the market needs because they're based on evidence is pretty critical to being able to be successful. And the faster you can make those cycle times modulo your market's ability to absorb change, the faster you can drive learning that allows you to outcompete. So I think that product managers can play a critical role in leading improvement here by promoting and supporting effective development habits. And that's one of the reasons I'm here today. I hope you'll agree. And why am I talking about habits? So 4 or 5 years ago, I had been unhappy with how much I weighed, especially after working a desk job at Agilent for a long time and being on an airplane every month for a week. And I really wanted to lose some weight, and I was having trouble doing it. And at one point, when I finally succeeded at it, what I realized was that I had been relying on discipline to attempt to do it. Well, I'm just going to tell myself not to eat that much, or I'm going to weigh myself every day and write down everything I eat, and I'm just going to not eat the things that are bad for me. It didn't work. And I think the reason for that is that, discipline requires effort, and you only have so much of it available, only so much of that conscious effort available. And we assume that the rational part of our mind's in control, but it's really not. And research bears this out pretty well. In an organization, it's a bunch of people. So we have the same thing, only in a collective way. And the habits and values of an organization are really the major contributors to organizational culture. So if you want to create durable change, you need to change habits. You need to change the way people behave when they're not really thinking about it. Anybody have any questions on that? Just real quickly, if you put up your hand, I'll call you. I'm trying to see if I can tell from the, there we go. All right, I'm not seeing, oh, I guess I can't see the whole audience here. All right, I'll let Liz let me know if there's something that somebody needs to ask a question. I'll move on.
Yeah, no questions at this time, John.
All right, thank you. So let's talk about the habits. The first one, I think, is probably the most challenging one. And I don't know how many of you are in an organization that already delivers a steady cadence of releases. And by cadence, I mean that the cycle time is fixed, no matter what, pretty much. This is a hard thing to do. It's really, really worth it, but it requires a mindset change. And one of the things that I like about it actually is that it requires a mindset change. It changes the way that product management, development, quality, and to some degree field support interact with each other and forces collaboration to occur in a pretty fine-grained way. And this is, I think, something that should be printed on the front of every book, presentation, or course about doing agile development at scale, but for some reason it's not. It seems to me that everybody understands, and it's almost a cliche, that you can pick two of these three things: quality, time, and scope. But most of the time people don't actually consciously pick them. And when they don't, what you usually get is scope comes first. People ask for everything that they can think of. The R&D team starts to work on it. We run out of money, a deadline gets imposed, and quality goes begging. And that is, I've seen this over and over again. This is the standard mode in which we work. This is how waterfall works quite a bit. And it's not much fun in general. It leads to the pathologies that I showed in the first slide. And you can actually break this cycle, but in order to do it, you have to have the executive support and the willpower to do a couple of things differently. The first one is to say that we're going to put quality first. It really changes the role of the quality department when you say that, and people have to know that you're serious about it. I used to tell people that my quality director had the big red handle that she could pull when she needed to stop the release. And I had to make sure people believed me about that. I don't think that she ever had to do it, but there are a couple times when it got close. And we always made sure that we drove continuous improvement that allowed us to make sure that we delivered product that met customer needs from the perspective of performance and reliability. And other needs that we knew that we had to meet, regulatory compliance, other things that we could think of, we put that in first. And we hit the cadence second. And this was something that was often contentious with my colleagues and sometimes with my boss as well. Why do we have to do that? Why can't we stretch the cadence out? And my answer was, it's a slippery slope. Once you start doing that, you're going to be back to scope, deadline, quality very, very quickly. And if you show that you have the fortitude to stay on cadence, then what essentially happens is if you miss some scope, you'll disappoint a small fraction of your stakeholders. If you miss the release date, you'll disappoint everybody. And it's very, very difficult to recover once you start doing that, because the amount of replanning that it takes when you miss a release date is much higher than the amount of replanning that it takes when you miss some scope. You can always stick the scope in the next release and say, okay, we missed it on this one, but we're going to put it at the top of the list for the next one. And so you know that you're going to get it within one release of when we promised it. 80% of the other stuff, maybe more, you already got. We delivered what we said we were going to deliver. We just got in trouble with this piece and we couldn't deliver everything we wanted. It's a much better look and a much better way of being predictable, because you're bothering fewer stakeholders if you make a miss on scope than if you make a miss on time. So that's kind of important. So we always said you have to learn how to develop with the idea that scope is variable. You get a fixed chunk of capacity. The team does the best they can to estimate how much capacity, how much stuff will fit in that bucket of capacity. It is almost always the case that what we want to get done is a multiple of what we can get done in the capacity that we have. And the conversation that results from that, with back and forth between the developers or technical leads, the product managers, resulted in a leaner, much more focused offering to market than we would have gotten had we just written up the Christmas time wish list of everything that everybody wanted and tried to stick it in the product. And I thought that was incredibly constructive. It forced a collaboration at the very beginning of every release that was irreplaceable. The next thing that's great about having a rhythm like this is you get the potential to have more frequent customer interactions. And because you know when these releases are going to come out, you do less planning, you do less schedule juggling, and you have the opportunity to start to drive some really interesting continuous improvement. One of the places where you can do that is to have a capacity model. A capacity model is essentially it's a spreadsheet artifact that you can use that tells you, like this pie chart in the bottom right corner, where is your work going? What are you using it on? How much of it are you actually delivering to product management to deliver to market for value-added features? And how much of it are you using just to stay afloat? And being able to see that exposed allows you to do a few things. One of them is it allows you to get a lot more deliberate about how you allocate the work you're doing. And the other one is that it starts to expose opportunities for getting essentially free increments of value capacity by improving some of these other areas. And usually one of the first things that it exposes is field quality problems are a really big issue. That was certainly one of ours. So exposing true capacity is important. And I assert also that you can reduce planning complexity. If you have, say, I know that this is slow by internet property standards, but let's say that you have a release coming out every quarter, and you know that it's going to come out, say, on the 15th of the first, fourth, seventh, and ninth months of the year or something like that. Then you can, or 7th and 10th months of the year, sorry. It's pretty easy to lay in to your calendar, understanding where all the holidays are, understanding when your meetings are going to be, when your key release planning interactions are going to be, and tell people in advance, you know, we want to have the team make themselves available for doing release planning 2 weeks before the end of release N for planning for release N+1. And you don't have to do schedule juggling all the time. If you're confident that you can deliver a release on a particular date, then getting a bunch of people to sign up for a set of interactions that can take a day or two, a fair amount of commitment to do, is much more straightforward than if you're constantly having to move that window around, especially with a large team of people. If you've only got one team, maybe it's not a problem, but when you have 300, 400, 500 people on multiple continents, it's really a problem. So this is a huge win if you have a big team. This does take a high level commitment. I had great CEO support, and I was lucky enough to be the general manager of this team. So I could hold product marketing, R&D, quality, customer support, and other departments sort of in alignment and say, I'm going to lay down on the tracks to make this happen, to support making this happen. You guys go do the magic, but this is what needs to happen. And we could do that. And after a while, people started to realize that it was really something they could be proud of, and we got results out of it. So I got a question. I don't know whether I can, Liz, you tell me whether I can ask a question like this and expect to get answers right now, but I'm really curious to hear, when I talk about quality, what do people see that as meaning?
I think you can definitely ask a question like that.
Awesome. Sometimes this is controversial.
So Tom did put it in the chat. Don't know if he feels like chatting about it. Lower defects.
Okay, that's certainly an important part. Anybody else?
And we've got Brooke just, I realized I was on mute, sorry. Brooke just texted in, low defects works as promised. And Ron has responded back, no significant to customer found defects.
Yeah.
And Nushman has responded, stuff works the way OT is supposed to without defects.
Yeah.
Tom said meets the expectations of customers. Jonathan has responded with operational excellence. So we've got quite a spread of answers there.
It's a good range. All of them are right. I think I would argue there's two kind of canonical definitions in the classic, quality is free days back in the dark ages. People said there's sort of two big definitions of quality. One of them is, I think somebody said, meets customer needs, right? So it's fitness for use, fitness for the intended use. Does it actually do what it's supposed to do? Does it work in the customer's hands the way the customer needs it to? And that's, I think, the ultimate definition of quality. And I think that sort of when several folks said, you don't get field defects out of it. I think that's the mirror image of that. It's exactly right. When it doesn't work the way the customer needs it to, you're usually going to hear back through support for that, and that's going to turn into field defects oftentimes. The other definition, which is useful, especially if you already know what your market needs, and with sort of venturesome products, with highly technical products and that sort of thing, you often don't, but with mature products, sometimes you do, is conformance to specs. Did the product as implemented do what we told the development team we wanted it to do? And that's an approximation of customer needs. If you're making an M3 screw, it's a really, really good approximation of customer needs. But if you're making, let's say an insulin pump, that might not be sufficient. So those two definitions, I think, are the key ones. And the one that I like the most for the purposes of this discussion is the one that most of you were alluding to, which is around, does it do what the customer needs it to do in their application? Because that's the insight that, as product managers, we need to get in order to deliver something that really makes a difference in the market. So thank you all for texting back. The next habit here, this was an interesting one for me. So at Agilent, we had people who had been in the market that we played in for their entire careers. Many of them had gotten PhDs doing the kind of science that we enable with our instruments. And so they had very, very strong opinions about what was needed in the market. And their opinions tended to derive from their history, essentially. They were highly qualified specialists in this field. And so their perspective was that things needed to work for highly qualified specialists in the field. What they didn't realize, because they were on the no-fly list, was that the market had changed. And a lot of the instruments that we made and the software that controlled them was being used by people who were not specialists in the field. In fact, the running only serious joke in the space was that a lot of times people who were operating the test and measurement, the scientific instruments that we made, were being operated by people whose last career stop had been a Starbucks. And so labs that used these instruments were looking for less and less expensive labor and moving specialists into more and more supervisory roles. And that meant that both the instruments and the software, the things that made them competitive, was changing. And we weren't plugged into it. So we were making software that was for specialists, and what we needed to do was to make software that was for the people who were actually using the instruments and for the other stakeholders who had a say on the purchase, which was often IT. So because there were so many strong opinions, in order to really see that, in order to pull that signal out of the noise, we had to develop sources of evidence that we didn't have, especially being the software division in a hardware company. You may not have, your mileage may vary here. Maybe you don't have that problem. But I think one durable takeaway from that is really in all cases, when you have people who've been around for a while and have fought hard to gain their knowledge of a market, there's going to be strong opinions. But markets don't hold still usually if they're interesting. And so developing good evidence sources and being sensitive to when you're hearing an opinion fight versus when there's evidence to support a decision is a really, really good skill to have. And as a product manager, again, your credibility hinges a lot on being able to marshal good evidence to support your decisions, because there are going to be opinions, and sometimes there will be people who will be at the same level or higher level than you in the organization will have a different opinion. You'll need to have some way to make your case. I know I've had that problem myself. So being able to do that, but also being able to say, this sounds like opinions, where can we find some evidence to find some common ground in making this decision, is a really good strategy when you're sensitive to a battle of opinions. So I think a good customer story is often a great thing as long as it's well corroborated. So if you talk to enough customers, you may be able to say, look, my customers, and I'll give you some names of customers, are telling me the following things, and this is why. That's pretty good. Even better is if you can get quantitative. It's a lot easier to justify decisions that are based on evidence, and it's a lot easier to get agreement based on evidence than on opinion, no matter how good the opinion is. The other thing about evidence is that it changes as the market situation changes, where opinions often don't. So I really like this one a lot. I think it's, I have to say, if you're only going to do one, do this one, but please do this one too. Continuous customer engagement is probably almost a cliche right now, but it's super important, and sometimes it's difficult to do. Again, customers don't always want to engage with you as frequently as you'd like to get their feedback. I think the other thing that tends to happen here is that we tend to take specialization on and assume that product managers own the customer and that everybody else does what they say. The problem with that is that you have to do a lot more writing and a lot more communicating if you don't have good shared context about what the customer actually needs and how they use your product. So one of the things that we advocated for was that everybody get a taste of walking in the customer's shoes, and we did that a few different ways. One of them was we were blessed with a lot of really old field problems, and so we decided that we were going to actually slow down new work and get right with our customers. And that meant that we actually sent developers, managers, and QA folks off, in some cases, onto customer sites to solve some really hairy problems that we've been leaving around for quite a long time. And they came back extremely excited about what they saw. Not only were they able to be heroes for their customers, for our customers, but they also learned a lot about how our products were used in real life and who was using them. And that gave them a much better intuitive feel for who they were working for and what mattered than they would have had if they were just reading specs. So I'm a huge fan of this. I really advocate trying it. You want to get that customer insight as deep into the organization as you can. There's a lot of ways you can do that. Thought leader partnerships can include just saying effectively, customers who have a vision and want help implementing it, who are willing to partner with you and ideally will help pay their way as that happens. You can invite leaders in the field in to do seminars for a broader audience. You can have what we call the Just Say Yes program. A Just Say Yes program is a program where you actually have a small team that when a customer comes in and says, can you make this for me? And they figure out a way to say yes to it and take some money. And in doing that, every once in a while, you get an idea that you can market much more broadly. The fact that somebody is willing to pay you money to do an idea like that is an indicator there might be more where that came from. It's not scientific at all, but it's a one-off. But it's interesting how many conversations you can start off of a program like that turn into something useful. And it can actually be a pretty healthy little chunk of business as well. Oftentimes those requests, if you have a complex product anyway, are simpler to execute than you would expect, but it's almost impossible to get any bandwidth for them unless you carve out a special program to do it. If they go into your main line of work, they will always fall to the bottom of the priority list because they don't have enough people behind them. There's not a big enough slice of market. So you're going to say no to it completely rationally. So what you can do is create a deliberate team, maybe a little one, that just does these things and pays for themselves by doing so. You can have user groups. The problem with user groups is that if you ask a question, if you ask for suggestions, you better be willing to deliver on them. If you ask for suggestions and you don't do them, then your user group will disengage and you'll do more harm than good. You probably know this already. So that's pretty important. Of course, it's the 21st century and we can get all kinds of analytical data. We can get analytical data around sales from the CRM system. We can get behavioral data out of our systems. If there's any software involved at all, it's often possible with sufficient investment to measure everything that gets used, how long it takes to use it, where people are frustrated, and so on. So these are great things to have. They do require investment, and sometimes that takes time. So as product managers, again, you get to decide how important it is to have this kind of infrastructure to enable you to make really good decisions about what's working and what's not working. Some companies are incredibly committed to this. For other ones, it's novel. certainly where we were, it was relatively novel, and we had to invest in it heavily. Support and service data is a goldmine. If you have a support team of actual humans who take actual trouble tickets from actual customers, you can discover amazing things and build deep connection with customers by doing root cause analysis. Once again, that means that you have to be willing to allow people to be interrupted when there's a serious enough customer problem coming around to actually start following that trail back and asking enough whys to understand what really happened with your system. But when you do, it gives you a huge amount of useful information for improving the usability and reliability of your product in the field. So again, something I really advocate. Root cause analysis, I can't overstate how important this is, both in terms of tracing down that kind of data, but also in terms of understanding the customer problem to solve. People tend, myself included, to start with a solution statement. My life would be better if only I had a faster horse. But you really have to work backwards from there to understand why. Why do you need your horse to be faster? Why do you need to get to the barn faster? And so on, and just keep working backwards until you understand the real problem to be solved and how solving that problem will provide advantage to the customer. We already talked a little bit about quality here. One of the questions I like to ask people is, so we're talking about getting it right for customers. We talked about quality as fitness for use. And the overall part of business here when we work together as a team is we're getting it right for our customers. And so again, one of the things that I like to ask is who's responsible for that? So Liz, would you mind opening the floodgates for anybody who cares to reply to that?
Yes, yeah, the chat's open. If anybody wants to reply or unmute and chat, they can too.
State the question again, John.
Who is responsible for getting it right for our customers?
Let's see, Ron answered in the chat and said, everyone, product
Ding, ding,
development
ding,
is
ding,
a team sport.
Yeah, it is indeed.
Yeah,
Indeed.
and
Right on the
it
first
looks
try.
like that's a reoccurring theme. And
I'm so happy to hear that.
Ideally PM folks. Tom said everyone in the product chain. Ali said the whole team, but at the end of the day, it's the PM's responsibility. And Brooke agreed, it's the whole team. Sama said mostly a product manager. So I see some people siding on the side of PMs, but most people are saying everybody.
Yeah, and I think the answer I like for teams to say is we all are. We're all in this together. Our job is to get it right for the customer. If it's not right for the customer, we're all going to pitch in and get it right for the customer, because that kind of collaboration is, I think, at the end of the day, what wins. It is true that ultimately PMs, their key performance indicators are being able to drive growth, reduce churn, increase the stickiness of the product, and so on. But if they don't have support from everybody else, if everybody else won't put down won't stop working the plan to take care of the customer problem or to actually address the customer opportunity, then they won't be as successful. So from a cultural basis, I think it's important to have people understand that everybody's first job is to get it right for customers. And so we used to say that we put the customer first, we put the company second, and then all of the parochial concerns come about fifth. And just to kind of give people the right thing. And I was fortunate enough that our CEO was really, really big on this and was very supportive. I once had a conversation with Mike McMullen where I had just joined, and I said, people are telling me that if I don't make my numbers, I'm not gonna survive around here. But you're saying do what's right for the customer. I said, I want to do what's right for the customer, but I'm really concerned what happens if doing what's right for the customer causes me not to make my numbers. And he said, listen, if you ever have that problem, come tell me about it and I'll make you whole. And so thus emboldened, I walked away and I worked with my controller, and we tracked every time we made a financial sacrifice to get it right for the customer. And I came to the conclusion that we never came out in the negative on that. We were almost always in a situation where it was either a rounding error or we came out ahead by getting it right for the customer. So we just kept doing it, and I never had to call in that chip. But the fact that I had Mike's support was really, really important to me. It was enabling. So I think he did a great job of walking the walk of we're going to be there for the customer. Habit 4.
John,
This
we
is
have a question in the chat. Are you okay with that?
Of course.
Anshuman is asking or mentioned that support for the customer is surely everyone, but what is right for them and who defines that?
What is right for the customer and who defines it? I think you have to have it. That's a really interesting question. So in my experience, most of the time it's pretty clear. The customer usually knows what they want, and I haven't found, for me, your business may vary, but in my business, it was pretty clear when the customer was aggrieved about something that we could do something about. And even if we thought that maybe things were a little dicey, we usually tried to err in the direction of making it right for them. There were some situations where we felt like somebody was messing with us, and we would take a firmer stance. But if we found that a customer had a quality problem, if we found that through no fault of their own, they were unable to get our products set up in a way, if we had a customer who had bet his or her career on using our software, we were going to bend over backwards to make them successful. And I think I would err on that side. Sometimes you might get taken advantage of, and you watch out for that. But I'd rather get taken advantage of occasionally than screw a customer. Your mileage may vary. So the word integrated means different things to different people. So I've in the second line here, I've said demoable. What you want is to have at least at the cadence of your release, and ideally much more frequently than that, to have all of the parts of your system, assuming that you make a system, if it's software, it's a system, to have something demoable to show that all the parts still work together. It's very, very easy for people to go through a wormhole while they're developing and coding and not necessarily check whether the thing that they're working on works with everything else. Two different people who are designing two different parts of the system may make different assumptions without realizing it. And the only way you find out is when you ask them to play together. Teams that wait until the end, and this is again very typical of waterfall, often get very unpleasant surprises. So I tell people that integration risk is one of the two biggest risks that happen in a technology product. The first one is market risk. Will anybody buy what you're making? And if you've already shipped one that's successful, then you've put some of that aside. But integration risk never really goes away. So when you're doing cadenced releases, it's very, very important to stay integrated, because that tail risk that comes from getting a late breaking surprise about integration can blow you out of the water really easily, and you'll have nothing to show for yourself. So in order to successfully deliver releases on cadence, you really have to stay integrated all the time. You have to mitigate that risk by pulling it forward, and ideally by integrating the system as often as possible. And what that means as a corollary is you don't build systems with separate pieces and only assemble them at the end. You have to assemble the pieces at the beginning and then aggregate on a higher and higher performing system, or a system that's closer and closer to customer needs. So instead of removing material here, maybe you're adding material, but effectively what you're doing is you're aggregating onto a working system more workingness, as opposed to developing some very intricate pieces and hoping that they fit together at the end. So this is a critical learning. Good agile software development teams do this pretty well. It also works in hardware programs, as long as you're mindful of the fact that in hardware you can have these very long procurement cycles. And so you have to think about how to do that in such a way that you maintain working hardware while you're waiting for the next versions of things to come up. And the last one, I probably should put a 5 there. I think I will, since I can. Psychological safety. So Google's Athena project famously did a lot of work on this. I think it was an understood concept before that, but they put data behind it. The highest performing teams have room for dissent. And they have room for dissent in such a way that people are not shamed or silenced for having a different view, but instead, those differences of viewpoint are treated as opportunities to learn more deeply about the topic at hand. So I tell people that perfection is a form of self-delusion. We all know we can't be perfect, and yet somehow in the workplace, often we feel like we're expected to be, and so we pretend we are. That includes things like doing extensive amounts of planning, building spreadsheets that have way too many decimal places and financial projections that are years out. And we oftentimes do that without really even noticing how likely those things are to be either a waste of time, wrong, or both. So there are lots of places where we let ourselves be trapped into expecting to make really good predictions, expecting to be perfect all the time. But as anybody who's ever learned anything knows, if you're learning, you are making mistakes. And when you're navigating a changing market, you have to be learning in order to win. So it's to be expected that you're going to be making mistakes. But what you can do is you can learn from them. You can always be improving every day, and you can try not to make the same mistakes over and over again. And again, this is a working definition of learning. You make new mistakes every time. You don't make the same mistakes over and over again. Accept them, learn from them. As a corollary, you want to reward candor. You want people to bring you bad news early when you can do something about it. When the boss is suggesting something that is potentially going to get us in trouble, it would be really nice if somebody politely tapped him or her on the shoulder and said, "Hey, have you thought about this?" And not get their head bitten off for doing it. So creating a culture where people can do this is really important. And as the Athena project discovered, it actually leads to the best performing teams. One of the corollaries of doing that is if you can frame work as experiments, that the goal is to maximize learning. This is a really good thing. I read a great book by Maria Konnikova called The Biggest Bluff. She's a professional poker player and a journalist and somebody who studies the science of decision making. And one of her big lessons in that game, from the game, was you cannot focus on outcomes. All you can do is focus on making the best decision at every hand. In a poker game, obviously, if you focus on outcomes, you're going to get upset and you're going to walk away because you don't have control. Real life isn't that much different. In businesses, we are expected to achieve outcomes. And in my experience, if you are always improving and you're always learning, you will achieve those outcomes. But you can't guarantee that every decision is going to be right. All that you can guarantee is you will learn from every decision. And if you're clever and you framework as experiments, the question that you will ask yourself is, how, at the end of delivering this thing to market, will we know whether or not we succeeded? Will we know whether or not we've gotten the result we expected? And if you can't answer that question, how you will know whether you've gotten the result you expected, you should rethink what you're doing. If you can't learn from what you're delivering to market, if you can't learn from your investment, then you're essentially navigating blind. So something to think about. Business results come from applying to learning. I like to say that learn fast is more important than fail fast. We're not really out to fail. What we're out to do is learning. Failing is a side effect of learning. The learning is the thing that we're after. Okay, 30 seconds on TCGen. We're a little tiny firm and we're focused on just two things: lean product management and agile development. Most of our principals have lived this stuff. We don't do methodologies. We're pragmatic, and we like to work with people who we can share our experiential learnings from. And we've worked with a pretty good cross-section of companies. Thank you very much for investing the time in this, and I would love to take questions. If you want more material, just drop me an email. You can also take a look at a longer article on the Agilent story on the TCGen website. Happy to open the floor to questions.
And we've got a number of questions that came in a little bit earlier. I know Ali was asking a little bit, digging in a little deeper to what happens as far as giving the customer what they need and versus what they ask. And so what happens when the customers don't really know what they want, or what happens when tomorrow's customers are significantly different than today's customers, as you were describing there? How do you get that? How do you deal with the scientists that are asking for features when you know you need to start focusing on the technicians, for instance?
Great question. I think it starts with developing good sources of evidence and being in touch with customers so that you have the anecdotal evidence you can use to tell the stories. I mean, we humans, we're story-driven animals, right? we put much more stock in stories than we do in reality. So some good customer stories are extremely helpful. Being able to go and say, you know, I went to, you know, these 50 labs, and I looked at the people who were operating our stuff, and none of them had a PhD, would be a good place to start, you know, for our case. Sometimes customers will just straight up tell you, your stuff's too hard to use. I can't use it. You have a competitor who makes something simpler. You start hearing that, you know that you've got to go somewhere. I'm not a big fan of looking over my shoulder at competitors, but if you're falling behind, you're going to hear that. And I think, I mean, your question is dead on, but I think I would say that answer number one is develop your sources of evidence, including good customer anecdotes. I talk to the following customers, and here's what they're telling me. I have market evidence that's saying that people are shifting over to software that has these characteristics instead of those characteristics. We had that problem in a number of ways, not just the changing demographic of the people who were using it, but we had a couple of other trends like that had gone on over the years. One of them was that because of the explosion of generic drug manufacturing that happened, probably in the late 90s to 2000s, there was an explosion in the amount of fraudulent drug manufacture that was happening. There was outright absolutely horrible stories of fraud. Contraceptives that had no active pharmaceutical ingredient, and so on, being manufactured by generic drug firms. And that led to a real change in the way that FDA expected the companies that made the software that analyzed those drugs to keep records and be secure and prevent certain sources of fraud. So as a company that made that software, as an organization that made that software, we had fallen behind in helping our customers to meet their regulatory compliance targets. And that included being very, very secure, delivering an audit trail, being able to spot and help do forensic analysis on situations that were suspicious looking. And we needed to really step up to do that. And we were seeing that in being outcompeted in certain fields. So that was another place where we had, the sales team was beating up on us to some degree, but you could really see it out in the field. And there was plenty of customer evidence in the win-loss to tell us that we needed to do something different. Another area where we needed to do something different that was really clear was that we started to see, as we visited customers, that when we looked at who was making purchase decisions, it had originally, back in the old days, it had been the lab manager, usually a PhD scientist, who led the lab. And as we got, when I got there, that had changed to the point where, especially in our large customers, the procurement department and the IT department had an outsized say. They almost always had veto power, and oftentimes they had specifying power over what we could do. And their concerns were things like, when I add a new system, when I add a new lab, I really don't want to send somebody with a PC over to Indonesia to set up a new lab. I want to be able to do it from the server room in New Jersey. What are you going to do to make that possible? Because I'm going to buy the software that lets me do that. I do not want to have to store any files in the lab. I want them all in some place where I can do disaster recovery, where I can do backup and restore and make sure that I have disaster prevention. What are you doing about security? What are you doing about scaling? How are you making it so that I can virtually provision these things? There were question after question like that we had to deal with. And it became clear that, again, going back to your question about features, it was non-feature stuff that was really enabling the sale. Another one that was really big was time to value. How long is it going to take me after I buy your thing before I can actually use it to make some money? And did you design that with that in mind? If I'm doing an upgrade, do I have to do a massive amount of revalidation, testing of the software to make sure that none of my stuff got broken because of the software that you changed? And we had to do an awful lot of work to make sure that we gave good signaling in that regard. And we're very, very disciplined in how we deliver changes to customers. So sorry for the very, very long-winded answer, but you asked a great question, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, very, very thorough answer. So that's appreciated. I also, and folks, feel free to raise your hand if you want to unmute, or type if you want me to read the question, feel free to put it into the chat window. One of the things that I thought was interesting, and I don't hear too often, was your comment about the sales incentive problem of the, quarterly quotas that come up, and recognizing that, that has a little bit of a human behavior, is driven by
Absolutely.
metrics, especially when survival's on the line.
Absolutely.
And I thought that was a rather enlightened approach to say, no, long term, we want to do the right thing by the customer, and if the metrics aren't supporting that, go with the right thing, and we'll fix the metrics after the fact. And I think that's a
Yeah.
very enlightened position, but you don't see that very often. That's a fairly
It's actually pretty self-serving, I'm going to say. It actually got us a tremendous amount of credibility with the sales team, and that was worth a lot. So, I don't think that we ever had to make a significant financial sacrifice to achieve that. And what we got in return was the salespeople knowing that we had their back, and that gave them a lot more confidence in selling our products. And when you have a company with a big sales channel like Agilent's, they don't have to sell our stuff if they don't want to. If it's not easy, they won't sell it. So we really need the confidence. So thank you for bringing that up, because I think I'm happy to have had the chance to say that.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone else have any thoughts, impressions, other
Ron has his hand up.
Hey, Ron.
Yeah, John, you've got you had a whole slide of capacity charts, and then you had the pie chart of capacity for one particular release. So so I'm presuming, but I'm asking, those are after the fact. Here's where we spent our time, as opposed to predictive charts.
So the the after the fact chart for release N is predictive for release N+1. So we use that as a baseline, but you're absolutely right. So it's a continuously refined model. So you take what you got out of the last release and you say, well, we were able to do that well. Maybe we can squeeze a little bit more out of this area next time. So this is what we're going to use as our capacity target. It's an estimate. We know it's not going to be 100% right. Things will change. But we did do exactly, what you're saying there. We took the last release's capacity target, thought about what had changed so far and what we thought we could achieve, and used that to make our best guess at what the capacity was going to turn out to be for this release, and then gave that to product management and said, here's what we have to work with.
And I think you're probably pulling payload and defects, at least, and maybe sustaining out of JIRA.
Yeah.
Misestimates and attrition.
We got those after the fact. Attrition was, misestimates and attrition obviously were after the fact, and we were able to do enough actuals measurement. So you bring up an interesting point. When you have an international crowd, an international team, you cannot, and I'm not even sure it's a good idea if you can, measure individual performance. It's illegal in Germany, among other places, to do that. And so you have to look at performance in the aggregate. And that means that these numbers come out in the aggregate at best, but we are able to track the actuals on things. We're able to look in aggregate at the amount of work that we spent on a given area, and pull that out, even though we can't trace that down to, say, an individual story or something like that. So we were able to pull out the misestimate behavior from our JIRA data. And then attrition, I would actually, I'm not sure I know the answer. I could find out, actually. I know exactly the person to ask how we calculated that.
Interesting. The Sama had a question. She typed in, she was wondering about the impact of location on target customers. And I think you probably have a good answer, being such a global business. But specifically, what's the key to successfully building a product for customers that goes across countries? And so all the localization and that end of it. Any interesting thoughts there?
Well, I don't know if they're interesting or not, but I'll tell you what I think. So this was an interesting challenge for us. I think, deliberately focused on markets internationally where we could get high growth. So we knew that we had to defend. By way of preface, so Agilent's revenue came about a third from the Americas, about a third from Europe, and about a third from Asia during the time that I was there. It's a pretty well balanced, but the growth was highly concentrated in Asia. The Americas and Europe were well fortified markets. There weren't that many new labs coming online, but in China in particular and in India, there was a great deal of expansion in drug manufacturing. There was a great deal of expansion in fine chemical and chemical manufacturing. There was a great deal of expansion in food labs, food testing labs, and that sort of thing. And those all constituted pretty big markets for us. And so we focused our efforts in China and India for growth. And we worked on sustaining our position in the Americas and Europe and growing where we could. But we knew that it was going to be a harder fight. So we made careful choices. Well, I should say we tried to make careful choices. Sometimes we didn't succeed about localization. We thought carefully about what we needed in the countries where we were trying to get the most growth. So and made our localization choices based on that. In all cases, what we called our definition of done, the things that you had to check off on the list before you could say that you had achieved a particular piece of scope that had been asked for included the infrastructure provisions for localization. So I think we called that internationalization. Effectively, that's did you use Unicode? Did you use the proper API calls that would work with large character sets and so on? And did you actually do the testing to make sure that you had enough space, since some languages are more verbose than others when they're put into a dialog box? We didn't always do all of the translation up front. And we were very careful about what languages we translated into, because every one that you add has a carrying cost for all of the releases that follow, and it's very difficult to discontinue a language once you've started it. So I'm not sure that's a super satisfying answer. I think if I were to go back and think about your question one more time, how did we tackle that? One, we made sure the code was ready for localization, so that when we made a decision to do it, we did it, we could do it. Second, we chose countries that we were going to translate into based on economic opportunity and regulatory necessity, and to some degree market necessity. If the market was one where being in the local language conferred a pretty big advantage, or it was required in order to be able to sell there, then we did it. Sometimes we decided to punt on a market that needed that if we didn't think it was big enough to support the effort that was required.
Very good. We've got a follow-on question kind of related from Anushman, was asking, any thoughts about how to get a good cross-section of the team connecting with customers, especially in a multi-country scenario? If you've got globally spread customers, you might have very different opinions on, this thing should be larger so I can operate it with my safety gloves on. This thing should be smaller because it doesn't fit in my tiny crammed space that's expensive real estate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So any thoughts around that?
Only that I think having that information is pretty important. You have to make a decision. It'll probably never be a perfect one, but at least understanding who you'll be inconveniencing and who you'll be delighting is really important. And in the example that you're pointing out there, it sounds like it's going to be almost impossible to please everyone unless you make multiple products for each locale. And I could imagine that would be the case in some places. In our markets, almost everybody was tight for space, and almost everybody needed something that was simple to use and dead reliable. So it was obvious which way the wind was blowing for us. We didn't have a whole lot of conflicts there. It sounds like your situation might be a little bit more involved. So there, you may have to make a decision to upset somebody, or at least to not be perfect for some parts of the market. I think that's okay. When we launched our new product, it was incomplete. We had a bit of I think I'd flatter ourselves a little bit by calling it an innovator's dilemma. We had a product that wasn't good enough for our customers. And my colleagues and the sales team were at pains to let us know that. And some people even went so far as to say, and I imagine some of you heard this before, if we don't have everything, we don't have anything. But it turned out that they weren't right. As it happened, our sales team was resourceful and was able to find a subset of customers who were really interested in adopting what we had, because it was a lot easier to use, because it was a lot faster. In some cases, because it was localized to their local language in ways that our previous products hadn't been, or because it met their regulatory needs. And they were willing to make some trade-offs of not having some of the advanced features. or not being complete in terms of what instruments it drove in order to get those things. So I think, where was I going with that? So you can, even with a product that's not perfect, you can still find a market. And your challenge as a leader there is to just do that in the right order. Pick a market that you can go take. Maybe it's not the biggest market yet, and then based on that success, go take the next beachhead and the next beachhead and the next beachhead. You don't have to be everywhere all at once. And in fact, it's probably better that you're not, and that you focus on doing a good job in one place and then decide how you want to take the next market. So if somebody has extremely challenging requirements, maybe they're not your first horizon.
Good thought. Good thought. Yeah, it matches what I've seen in some other global companies saying that they didn't want the perfect product that was perfect in North America and then was rated average in Europe and was hated in Asia. They would rather have something that was people thought was pretty decent across all three markets. And that was easier to achieve, having something that nobody hated, and that most people thought was decent, as opposed to it was very easy to tune the preferences to the point where you could build something that was beloved in Europe, but you couldn't sell elsewhere, and likewise with
Wow.
North America. So you had to try and maximize the area under the curve, as it were. And that meant not ignoring the dips and the spikes to leverage that out. If we've got, I don't believe we have any additional questions. So, and I think we're kind of in a good spot from a time perspective. If you wanted to stop your slide share, we've got a
Sure.
handful of things we wanted to share with the audience. But before we do that, I'd like to, on behalf of the audience and everybody that's been listening, this has been a really, really well done presentation. A lot of great takeaways. I love having a list to go back and check against things. That's always a helpful thing. And so thank you for your time and giving back to the product management community.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. And I really appreciate everybody who raised their hand, asked a question,